This episode is made possible by our sponsor, Landmark College, the college for students who learn differently, offering comprehensive supports for students with ADHD and other learning differences, both on campus and online. Learn more at lcdistraction.org.
Hello and welcome to Distraction. I'm your guest host, René Brooks. One of the things that I think is most important about life post ADHD diagnosis is forming or finding community. It needs to include people who have ADHD themselves, because when you've got community, you've got access to a wealth of knowledge and experience. And if you've ever heard the term, it's not what you know, it's who you know. When you know a bunch of different people with ADHD, they tend to know other people with ADHD, and you've got the access to their wealth of knowledge. And another thing that community does for us, I believe, is it normalizes our experience, probably for most of us for the first time ever. So if you've gone through your life believing that you're lazy, if you've gone through your life believing that you're stupid, if you've gone through your life feeling like you're some kind of foreign creature who's never going to measure up to the people around you, you start talking to other people who leave their keys in the freezer, and you start to think maybe it's not a big deal. Sure, we don't want our keys in the freezer, but it is not the huge, oh my gosh, I can't believe you did that. Who would ever do that? You're such a mess and you're impossible thing that it can sometimes turn into when all we have to compare is neurotypical people. So, long story short, find your community, get connected with them. I think it'll be great for you in the long run. Having said that, today I'm going to be responding to a few questions about ADHD that we've received from some of you, our listeners, our community. I've asked our producer, Sarah Girton, to join me today so she can read the questions to us. Thanks for being here, Sarah.
Hey, Renee, I'm happy to be here.
Wonderful, wonderful. So what is our first question?
Okay, this person wrote, is there a computer monitor that is ADHD friendly? Does a bigger monitor help us because we can compare documents side by side as opposed to switching back and forth between pages due to poor working memory? Thank you, Amal.
All right. So here's what I think about that. And it's not super duper ADHD related, but kind of is, because everything is in the end, isn't it? So there's been several jobs where I worked where I had a dual monitor. And when you have a dual monitor, so you've got, like, say you're copying a list or you're working off of a list or you need to shift a bunch of information, like something you're working off of, right? So, like, depending on which way is most convenient for you, you have one monitor on one side, and then the monitor that you're, doing the input or the activity or whatever, all of that is on a different screen. So you're able to utilize both and not have to do a bunch of flipping back and forth, because that flip back and forth is treacherous. Like, for me, if I change from tab to tab, I might open another tab and start looking at something else. I might go back to an old tab that I left open and jump into that project and never come back to what I was working on. So I think that dual monitors can be super helpful for that, if that's something that you know how to set up and get going for yourself. I loved it. And in fact, when you read the question, one of the first things I thought was, I need to get back to that. I need to do the dual monitor thing again. Like, I'm like, do I have it? That's how you know, like, when you reach a certain age, like, you've accumulated enough stuff that you can say things to yourself like, "Do you still have that monitor in the back of the closet that you put there when you moved and thought you would never use it? Because that would come in handy right now."
For sure. And especially with you, with your vertical heterophoria, I mean, I'm wondering how that is impacted.
Which is funny because I think when I think about dual screens, I think that one of the reasons why it started to become so much worse that I had to go get something done about the neck pain was because of the dual screens. Before I got treated for the vertical heterophoria, you remember, your eyes are refocusing consistently, and so you're shifting your eyes from one screen to the next. So there's even more refocusing involved because you're never in one place. So I really think that it aggravated the
Mm,
condition. It's not a big deal now, although, like, screens in general are harder on your eyes.
hmm. So something to be mindful of, I guess.
Absolutely.
Okay, you want me to read the next question?
Give it to me. This is fun.
Okay, this one says, I'm not sure if you've done an episode on being someone with ADHD, married to someone with ADHD, but I would really love to hear more about it. Specifically, I would like to hear more about ways to effectively communicate and problem solve as partners with ADHD when communication seems impossible and frustrating for both partners. Another question I have is, if one partner is managing and getting treatment for the ADHD and the other is not, how might one convince the other partner to get help for the ADHD related issues that are affecting the other partner? Best wishes, Dina.
Okay. So let's start backwards and we'll start with this second question. If one partner is managing and getting treatment for the ADHD and the other is not, you still have to let your spouse have autonomy and choose whether or not they're going to receive treatment or, you know, go about a treatment plan that you think that they should go about. When we're married and our destinies are so linked to each other's, it's easy to get into the place where we feel like we can make decisions for our spouse and we can convince them of things. And that's fine for things like, I don't know, what type of refrigerator you're going to pick. But I think when it comes to how I'm going to handle my health personally, even though it affects you, and I'm not trying to take away from that for an instant, and this is just my personal opinion, I don't think we have a right to tell someone you have to treat your ADHD in the method that I think you should, because treatment means different things to different people. For some people, awareness of ADHD and how it works and how it makes you think, for some people that's sufficient. For some people they like to, try holistic homeopathic type of things. And then others choose, the a stimulant med or a non-stimulant med, and keeping up with therapy and things. Like, there's a myriad of choices, and it's very personal. And I would highly recommend that, like, encouraging your spouse is a wonderful thing as far as, trying to say, "Hey, I think this would be helpful for you." I think, like, so I'm having a hard time with the question in the sense that it's almost like you are affecting me, and so therefore I need to convince you to go do something about it. It's I need you to go get treatment because you're having a negative effect on me, not necessarily because I want you to experience the effects. And that probably isn't how they meant it. Like, in fact, I highly doubt it, but it's like that's how it can come off to the spouse, right? I want you to go get treatment for your ADHD because you're driving me up the wall. And I don't think that's the feeling we wanna leave our spouses with. So, I guess if you wanted to convince them or try to, make them take a look at it, maybe just find some people who are thriving with ADHD and connect them with content where people are talking about how treating their ADHD really, helped them. There's a lot of good stories out there where people are talking about how they felt before they were diagnosed and afterwards. There's also, for married people with ADHD in general, there's a book called The ADHD Effect on Marriage and The Couple's Guide to Thriving with ADHD. Both of those were written by Melissa Orlov, and she's been writing about it and doing coaching and workshops for some time. So there's a lot of things that she has to say about being married with ADHD. On a personal note, I was married to someone with ADHD, and I always have to throw the caveat in, like, we're divorced. So it's like, take my divorcee advice for what it's worth. But I think the thing that I wish I would have done more as a spouse is, I think that because I was further along in my journey and my ADHD was better controlled than his, I sometimes I know there were times that I left him with the impression like my ADHD is better controlled, so therefore I should be the one that makes this decision, or I should be the one that chooses the direction. And for me, it was I should be the one to make the call or choose the direction because I'm the one that's doing the bulk of the work. Valid, but it wasn't a kind thing to do. I don't think it left him with a good feeling. Now, mind you, this person routinely weaponized my own ADHD symptoms against me and made things impossible for me. So, I think that communication and understanding and empathy, like the same empathy you would want to receive, give it. And that's whether you're dealing with ADHD or any other part of life, that's what you want to do. And I think the kindest thing that you can do for yourself as well as your spouse is be aware of your boundaries and enforce them. They're your spouse. A lot of times we give our spouses license to go so much further with us than we would let anyone else because they're our spouse. And if anything, we spend the most time with our spouses. I think it's really, really important to set your boundaries and hold them, probably more important than it is to hold them with a stranger, because you can get away from a stranger. You're not getting away from your spouse, at least not the way it's supposed to work, right? Like, we marry these people with the intentions of staying with them forever. Why would we allow ourselves to set a precedent that we're going to have to deal with forever? So, if you don't like dealing with the way that your spouse is managing their ADHD and it's affecting you, consider putting some boundaries in place that will help to protect you from the ways that their ADHD is affecting you. So, for instance, we maintained separate accounts. He was always overdrafting his account or spending more money than he should, and it would dip into, the amount of money that I thought was there to pay a bill or spend. Well, now we don't have a joint account.
Hmm.
Easy solution. Like, if one person is paying something out of the other account, we'll just, there's Venmo, PayPal, Cash App. There's so many options there. Like, that was an easy fix. I mean, that's just one example. Like, if you're going to come home and trash the house, I'm not going to clean it. I'm going to clean the house one time, and then you'll have to deal with whatever other mess is there, and just, hang in there, soldier, figure it out. So I don't know. Like, only you know what you're willing to put up with and what you're not. And it sounds to me like the person who wrote this knows exactly what their spouse is doing that bothers them. And I would highly recommend setting a firm line about what you're willing to participate in and what you're not, because you can't control their behavior, you can only control your own.
Which kind of answers her question about effectively communicating and problem solving as well. Sounds like they're kind of all tied together.
Yeah, and, like, I think it's very easy when you're the spouse whose ADHD is better controlled to become bossy and infantilize your spouse, and they resent you when you do that. And I think they're justified in their resentment. And again, like I'm not proud of it, but I think that was the end that I slanted to. You know what? I'll say this. I think that in different parts of our marriage, we were both those people, and it just wasn't a good fit.
Mhm.
But I do wish that I could have been just a little more. No, I'm not gonna say that because it's not true. I don't wish that I had been a little more patient because I was super patient, and you know what I wish? I wish I would have put more boundaries in place. I do. I wish I would have put more
Mm.
boundaries in place and been stood firm in protecting those boundaries,
Mhm.
because I think part of the reason why I resented him was because of the effect he was having on me, but I was the person who was letting him run roughshod over me to a certain extent. Like,
Mhm.
you can't control their behavior, but you do have the right to step back from it.
Right.
Although we can talk about, like, when abuse is involved, like, it's blurrier than that, but that's, like, we're going to assume that they are not in an abusive relationship.
Right. Well, that was a great question, Dina, and thank you for sending that email. Hopefully, Renee's words of wisdom helped there.
I hope so. I mean, keep in mind this is marriage advice from a divorcee, so, proceed with caution.
But you've seen some stuff, I'm sure.
For
So,
sure, for sure, and I think, what do they say? Love can cover a multitude of sins. It can, but you wear your love out when you don't give love with boundaries.
we're going to pause right here for a quick minute to tell you a little bit about some virtual open houses coming up at Landmark College. On December 15th and January 7th, you can get an idea of what it's like to be a student at Landmark College. They are having all sorts of events on those 2 days, a live chat session with admissions counselors, a student panel Q&A, a staff panel Q&A. They have a lot of good things going on. So if you've heard us talk about Landmark and you're curious to see what it's like for you or someone you love, check out their virtual open house. You can register and get more information by going to lcdistraction.org and click on open houses and visits on the left-hand column for more information. All right, let's get back to the questions. Okay, you want to answer one more?
Let's do it. I'm ready.
Okay. This one says, "Hello and thank you for your podcast. My 7-year-old was recently diagnosed with ADHD after a neuropsychological evaluation. How do we prioritize next steps? I'm tempted to read all the books and do all the lay research, but I'm also very tired and she's doing okay in school. Thanks, Erica in Seattle."
Well, thank you for your question, Erica. It's funny, I talked to Sarah earlier and she mentioned this question to me, and I had lots of thoughts because I just had this conversation with a friend. When we're talking about ADHD, most often we talk about how it affects us at school and at work. And I don't think when people ask how they're doing in school or how a person is doing at work, I don't think they realize the impact that ADHD is having on your social life. Like a 7-year-old, like say you ask a 7-year-old to, I don't know, like you've got a kid who was once 7, Sarah.
Mm-hmm.
What give me a chore. What would you ask a kid to do?
Take out the garbage.
There you go. You ask your 7-year-old to take out the garbage. They say they forgot. You ask them how they forgot when you just told them 5 minutes ago. They say they don't know. A lot of parents will assume that the child is intentionally not listening. And what do? What do they teach you to do when your child doesn't obey what they've been asked to do? You apply consequences, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's just one small example. Like, there are children who are consistently being punished for something and disciplined for something that they're being punished for something they don't have any control over, and they need to be taught those things. It can make ADHD can also make it difficult to make friends. Some kids struggle really, really hard with that. So it's like grades are not the only indicator, in my opinion, of whether or not your child is thriving. Like, can the child follow through with the things you're asking them to do? Can the child make friends? Just like, I don't know, like there's like watch the child socially as well as in school. Like, how do they interact with others? Do you know what I mean? Like, does that make sense? I feel
Mhm.
like I'm kind of going
Mhm.
around in a circle a little bit.
No, I mean, it makes sense to me because we were also talking about how, as a parent, if your kid's doing okay in school, you kind of feel like you're doing okay. Like,
Yes.
if they're doing okay in school, then they're okay, and what I feel like you're saying is that's not necessarily true.
No, like, oh my gosh, I was like, oh my gosh, I was always, 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 always in trouble for having a messy room or forgetting to do the dishes. And someone is there asking you to tell them why you didn't do what you were asked to do. And when that kid looks at you and says, "I forgot," or "I don't know why," like, the parental assumption is usually not to believe that. So, you're telling your parent, "I don't know why I did that. I don't remember this thing that you told me to do." And they're saying, "Yes, you do remember. No, you didn't forget. Like, this was not accidental. You did this on purpose, but you didn't."
Mhm.
It's gaslighting, really.
I was just thinking of that word. Yeah,
Like, it's not
yeah.
intentional, right? But
No.
it's still gaslighting.
I mean, because kids tend to not tell the truth. I mean, that happens, so and they wanna get out of stuff.
Thank you. And so, like, parents will tell you some kids with ADHD do have a challenge when it comes to the truth.
Mhm.
So there's that too. But again, if your child is having a challenge with telling the truth, you can lie. You be a terrible liar and get good grades.
Mhm.
You can eat lunch alone every day and still get good grades. You can be grounded for the rest of your life because you haven't cleaned your room or done the dishes and still get good grades. There's this whole world beyond school that we're not examining if the only thing that a person says to you is they're doing well in school, so they must be okay. Who cares about that? I mean, not that school isn't important. I'm not saying school isn't
Right.
important. It is very important, but school is not the only important thing in a child's life.
And maybe the teachers might be a good place for this mom to turn and ask some of those social questions.
Absolutely, because they know if your child eats lunch alone every day. They
Mhm.
know if your child is like for some kids, like they're super wound up, like they're always on 10, and kids will tell them that they're annoying and that they don't want to be near them.
Mhm.
And then they'll keep trying and they'll keep getting rejected. That takes its toll on a person's self-esteem. Like that to me, when I heard that, I was like, I mean, clearly, like, again, I'm going to assume best intentions. They don't realize the way that ignoring the social effect of ADHD can be problematic. And then if you're at school, like a 7-year-old isn't there yet, but deadlines. You're missing deadlines.
Mhm.
That has it. Well, I guess at that point, if you're missing deadlines, then you're not doing well in school, at which point, the doctor now thinks it's necessary. But how many times have you been rejected and punished for something and told that you weren't trying your hardest when you were, or you weren't trying to complete something when you were? By the time you start doing bad in school, it might be too late. There's irreparable damage done to your self. Okay, irreparable is a little dramatic, but there's an impact to the self-esteem.
Damage.
Yeah, like,
Yeah.
it's damaged, like and you know what? Like, you might not be able to fix it. Like, right there is when people say that they think the anxiety and depression that can come along with ADHD is from what it's like to live with undiagnosed ADHD. I think there this conversation we're having is part of the starting point. Like these
Mhm.
experiences that you have in school, teachers can say incredibly cruel things and do
Mhm.
incredibly cruel things. Like, okay, so I had good grades in 5th grade, but my teacher routinely dumped my desk out on the floor
Oh, wow.
when my desk was too messy for his taste.
Did you tell your mom about that?
I believe I told her about it. Like, I don't think people realize stuff like that humiliates you know, people
Yeah.
are into these extreme punishments with kids, like, they won't clean their room, so I'm gonna go in there and put everything in a trash bag and
Right.
throw it
Thank you,
out the
dad.
door,
Yep.
and that'll learn them once and for all. No, it's
Yeah.
not, it's gonna make your kid hate you.
Right.
Good luck. But they do. It's like they assume there that there's obstinance and there's intention and the child is defying
Mhm.
me. So now I gotta like get in there and like one up the
Right.
kid
Show
and
them.
show them who's
Yep.
boss. And it's just not necessary.
Right. But I think you definitely bring up many good points because something was going on for her daughter to be diagnosed in the first place. But this question doesn't really say what that is. So doing okay in school, like we don't really know where issues were coming up that caused her to get this evaluation.
So, like, look, I've gone around every single thing except for the look, you see, I went on that whole rant. This poor person asked me how they prioritize next steps. They didn't even need all that information from me,
But
and
they
I've
did.
gone
But they did.
I think the way to prioritize the next step is to look like we think there's a special way. Look at what your kid needs. Where do they need the help? Is the best place to decide. So you can read the books, you can do the things if you're too tired to do that, like I would recommend seeking out like a coach. Like there are coaches who help parents of children with ADHD. Like for a child that young, the parents are really the ones who would want to seek the coaching versus the child because, you know, at 7, your parents have the control of your environment and how you spend your time and how you structure your life. So that's not something a kid would have choices over. But you could work I would think working with a coach to figure out how to best support you would save you the time of having to go delve and dive and do all the research and get the understanding and then bring it back. Like, if you're too tired to do that, that would be my recommendation.
And we just had one of those parent coaches on a couple weeks ago.
Yes, Brendan. Brendan's
Yeah.
a parent coach. So, you know, go to ADHDessentials.com. Talk to Brendan or someone like
Or
Brendan.
listen to his episode from a couple weeks
Yes,
ago. He gave some good advice and kinda talked a little bit about what he does with parents, his work.
absolutely. Because parents need support and they need to be able to understand. Like, I think people talk a lot about the damage that parents do, but they don't realize like the parents do not know. They're going with conventional child rearing wisdom, which isn't it's very ill fitted for a child with ADHD. And you also have to labor under the assumption that the parent like, you know, we as adults struggle to reconcile whether or not we think we really have ADHD, even after we've been diagnosed with ADHD. Like, there's people who have a moment of doubt and go, do I really have ADHD or am I just insert adjective here?
Mhm.
So, if we as adults who are experiencing it struggle with it, imagine watching your child and trying to figure out, like, are they pulling my leg? Are they trying to get out of of a responsibility? Or is there a real problem? And I think the main thing to do there is think about the kind of person your child is, right? Like some people, Like, there's a lot of children who are very eager to please, especially at 7. Most kids at 7 years old, they wanna be helpful. They want you to show them new things, like, they're excited. They don't want to disappoint you. So, if you see a child who's consistently not doing what they're asked and being put in a position where they're being scolded or reprimanded, that's an indicator. You know what I mean? Like,
Mhm.
that's
Mhm.
not.
That's not how it should be going.
Yeah, like, that's not intentional, because if it was intentional, like, kids understand consequences by 7 years old. Like, wouldn't it be better to err on the side of believing what your child said if you had to err?
Yeah.
It's almost like we're afraid the parent police are gonna find out that we're being too soft and come get us. Like, there's so like, I think that's part of the problem with parenting. There's so much, like, you have to get in there and show those kids who's boss. You cannot let them run all over you. You cannot
Yeah.
let them control you, and it's just like, what if I just love my kid real loud and I listen to them when they tell me stuff and believe them? Like, is that cool? Like, it's hard to do, right? Because there's so much
Yeah.
pressure to be like I'm the parent that doesn't take any shit. Like, a lot of peer pressure there. Which I don't understand why we all don't talk about it, because everyone who's parented anyone hates that. We all
Yeah.
hate it. Why are we so willing to accept it when none of us like it?
It's a great question.
I don't know.
Well, good luck, Erica. I mean, please let us know how it goes.
I really do hope that it goes well. And it's really important. Like, we talked about some topics here that can be really difficult for people when you're talking about, contention in a marriage because of ADHD, or you're trying to, advocate the best way that you can for your child. It's really important to remember that when you get into those situations, we're all in this together. We can work together, share your experiences with people, be honest, be open. I find, like, when people ask me, what's the best way to say to a person XYZ, I usually look at them and go, tell them XYZ. The truth the truth of the matter is usually the easiest way to go. And if you're able to be straightforward with people, and again, here we go with Renee's opinions, but I think if you're
That's what
straightforward
you're
with
here
people,
for.
right? Like, you guys put me on here so that I can give my opinion about stuff, and I am going to give it. But seriously, like, just there's no special way to say every single thing, you know? Like, sometimes just the truth. When you do this thing, I understand that you're doing it because of ADHD, but it is impossible for me to come to a place of acceptance with it, and I have tried. What can we do together to find a way where we're not at each other's throats about this? Because I don't want to be jumping all over you about something because I don't like it. I just think saying, "Hey, I love you, but this doesn't work for me, and you work for me, so I want to find a way to make that work." It makes sense. But again, keep in mind, you're taking relationship advice from a divorcee. Like, you know what? Positive advice from a divorcee is good. It's when you get into that negative advice, when the divorcee says, "Oh, well, just leave them." It's easy for you to say you already went through divorce. Divorce is hard.
Yeah. Marriage is hard, it's all
It
hard.
is.
It is, but I love all of the advice you gave today, and I really hope we get more emails.
Yeah, send us an email so we can read your questions and talk about them. Like, these were really good questions. These were fun. So, if you have a question you'd like me to address in a future episode, please write an email or record a voice memo and send it to connect@distractionpodcast.com. Distraction is created by Sounds Great Media. Our producer, who you just heard, is Sarah Girton. I'm your guest host, René Brooks. You can find me at blackgirllostkeys.com. We do fidget toys, we do coaching, we do lots and lots of content. There's all kinds of good things over there. Until next time.
The episode you just heard was made possible by our sponsor, Landmark College, the college for students who learn differently, offering comprehensive supports for students with ADHD and other learning differences, both on campus and online. Learn more at lcdistraction.org.